US threatens Russia with new sanctions and pledges Ukraine weapon if Kremlin ignores ceasefire calls. Senior US officials discuss boosting military aid to Ukraine and how EU leaders Russian alternative Ukraine peace plan. The latest news next. EU leaders are developing their own plan to end the war in Ukraine, which is expected to be more favorable for Kiev, the Wall Street Journal reports. According to the publication, European politicians are trying to persuade Kiev to support the draft of their document, which in the EU's view includes conditions more favorable for Ukraine. Europe hopes to have the plan ready within days, but Kiev has so far not committed to joining it, the article states. The authors also note that Europe may be preparing a new plan to express dissatisfaction with the US proposal. It is expected that today Secretary of State Marco Rubio will discuss the American initiative with European officials. EU leaders in private conversations describe US President Donald Trump's plan as a capitulation of Ukraine and will try to use their connections in Washington to dissuade the administration from pursuing this proposal. The European Union is disappointed with the US approach to resolving the war in Ukraine and the very bad peace plan that requires concessions from Kiev, Politico reports. As a near EU official familiar with the new US proposal said that it was just a list of points to satisfy Putin and a very bad plan. But the signals are that Ukrainians have to accept it. Kiev is making it clear that putting pressure on Ukraine is unnecessary and won't help anyone, he says. Another senior European official says the timing of the White House's latest efforts is particularly unfortunate, given that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is already hard pressed by military gains by Russia and the internal turmoil of the corruption scandal. According to the agency, Europeans are facing another harsh realization. Their efforts to secure a place at the negotiating table by agreeing to pay for military aid to Ukraine do not seem to be working. How do Europeans have so little agency here even when we are now paying the entire bill, says the second senior EU official, calling the concessions demanded of Ukraine unreasonable. Senior US officials discussed boosting military aid to Ukraine. During his visit to Kiev, US Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll discussed with Ukrainian officials a significant increase in military support as part of the so-called Vitkov-Dmitriev peace plan, according to Bloomberg. One of the sources, interviewed by journalists, reported that despite the alleged support from US President Donald Trump, this so-called peace plan, developed by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in agreement with the Russian regime's Special Representative Kirill Dmitriev, is still under discussion, and the fate of the negotiations themselves remains uncertain. In particular, Driscoll's visit to Kiev was not aimed at presenting Ukraine with the fate comply in the form of a peace plan, but at finding solutions and options acceptable to Washington and Kiev.
A delegation of top U.S. military officials, led by Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, was in Kiev this week discussing avenues for progress, and options include ramping up military support.
Strong opposition. The 28-point US peace plan, according to which Ukraine must cede territory and limit its armed forces, has met with strong opposition from US partners and allies, as well as from American politicians.
It bothers me how little effort has gone into it. It's going to be declared dead on arrival by a whole host of people, starting with Zelensky himself. He's careful right now. He's saying that he's reviewing it, but I don't see any circumstances where he would be prepared to accept a plan like this.
Says about this former US ambassador to NATO, Juliana Smith. NATO is dissatisfied with the restrictions imposed on the alliance by the Vitkov-Dmitriev plan. Western countries are also unwilling to see Russia return to the G8. At the same time, the concessions that Russia must make are considered insufficient. Several Western leaders have spoken out against the plan as a whole, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Greek Prime Minister. The Greek Prime Minister says,
"A lot of the points that I saw are quite problematic. We've also made it quite clear that at the end of the day, the most important security guarantee for Ukraine is a strong Ukrainian army."
About Driscoll's visit and peace plan, on November 20th, Ukrainian Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal and Armed Forces Commander Alexander Syrsky held talks in Kiev with an American delegation led by US Army Secretary General Driscoll. During the meeting, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and US Army Secretary Dan Driscoll also agreed on a tentative timeline for the preparation and signing of a future agreement based on the American settlement plan. Work with the American delegation on the peace plan is ongoing in Kiev. At the same time, information about alleged approval or removal of points does not correspond to reality, according to the National Security and Defense Council Secretary Rustem Umerov.
While work with the American delegation continues in Kiev, assumptions about the content of the consultations are appearing in the public space. I want to immediately clarify briefly. During my trip to the United States, my task was technical, organizing meetings and preparing the dialogue.
According to him, he provided no evaluations or even more so approval of any points. This is not within his powers and does not correspond to procedure. He also emphasized that yesterday a conversation took place between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the American delegation authorized by US President Donald Trump. Today, the work continues in Kiev at the technical level between the teams.
We are carefully studying all proposals from partners, expecting the same respectful attitude toward the Ukrainian position. Media publications about alleged approvals or removal of points have nothing to do with reality. These are examples of unverified information that appeared outside the context of consultations.
The NSDC secretary also stressed that Ukraine is carefully processing the partners' proposals within its unchanged principles: sovereignty, the safety of people, and a just peace. The United States is prepared to impose additional economic sanctions against Russia and continue supplying weapons to Ukraine if the Kremlin continues to ignore calls for a ceasefire, U.S. Permanent Representative to the UN Michael Waltz says during a UN Security Council meeting. Waltz stresses that diplomacy is the only path to a lasting and just peace.
We have proposed generous terms for Russia, including sanctions relief. We have asked Russia to halt its attacks and meet directly with Ukraine to negotiate a peaceful settlement. Unfortunately, the fighting continues, tragically causing more civilian casualties.
The US ambassador also recalled the incursion of Russian drones into the airspace of third countries, including our NATO allies, which risks further escalating this conflict. He stresses that Ukrainian strikes on Russia's energy sector and other critical infrastructure have limited the Kremlin's ability to finance its military economy. Waltz also adds that Russia has suffered over 1 million casualties and is under pressure from tough international sanctions. The ambassador stresses that the bottom line was that the cost for all sides had been devastating and that it was time to end the war. He says he hoped everyone agreed that the war would not end militarily and that the leaders of Russia and Ukraine had to negotiate. He emphasizes that both countries had to agree to a ceasefire. He recalls that at the end of October, the US imposed additional sanctions against 2 of Russia's largest oil companies and threatened Russia with new sanctions and further arms supplies to Ukraine if the Kremlin did not cease fire.
We can impose further economic costs if Russia continues to ignore calls for a ceasefire. We will also continue to make weapons available for Ukraine's defense.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. Support Ukraine, like and subscribe.